and welcome to X-Bank Talks, the series which shines a light on the next generation of financial services. In this series, we'll be talking to some of our partners in fintech about the future of banking and get their point of view on key trends and themes. We'll look at how challengers and incumbents are upgrading their banking platforms and creating new capabilities to meet the challenges tomorrow. I'm Sean, Chief Technology Officer for Financial Services at Publicis Sapient, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Jan Willem, Senior Client Partner and Alliances Lead, and Mike Walters, Chief Product Officer of Form3. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I thought it would be good to start off maybe the conversation in terms of saying, like, you guys are at the heart of what's happening in the payment space. You know, there's challenger banks that are kind of eating into the incumbents. There's things like cloud where banks are trying to get all over it. I mean, where do you see the landscape going over the next 2 to 3 years?
So I think there's a couple of things that we definitely see from customers, right? And so, you know, we have a range of clients across that spectrum of those who are trying to compete, those who are new in, just getting licenses, all the way through to tier one banks who are really trying to work out how to maintain their position and continue to compete. And I think you see some pretty consistent themes across that group. The first is there's just a lot of competition, and it's coming from all over the place, right? So, you know, technology firms starting to look at it, new, almost sort of segregated challenger banks, taking off individual portions of markets rather than these ideas of sort of, you know, the classic universal banking model. So there's a lot more organizations in the mix. And I think that means there's a real clamor for, you know, how to differentiate. But at the same time, particularly in the payment landscape, there's some stuff that's just got to work. And so you see that entire group wrestling with how do we on the one hand build these kind of competitive, new, differentiated customer experiences, and at the same time plug this technology into stuff that was written in the 70s, 80s and 90s, which is the rest of the payment ecosystem. So, you know, I think certainly what we observe is, you know, these clients really trying to almost take the payment technology stack that they've had in their sort of kit bag for the last, in some cases 30 or 40 years, and work out how to bring that up to the level of the area they're having to compete with digital experience. And so, you know, that's kind of the area that we play in, but I think it's a real theme of how does the infrastructure and tech of a bank, new, incumbent, challenger and old, how do they, you know, make the slightly less glamorous stuff that just needs to work operate in the same way with the same level of sort of technology as the areas that they're trying to compete with at the front end with clients.
If I'm a large bank, I mean, like payments and payments infrastructure is like the heart of the beast, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like a core banking platform, right? So, you know, I mean, that's a very kind of like key part of banking infrastructure. Yeah. I mean, what do you see in terms of saying most of the challenges that you hear from, you know, people in terms of saying like you can't touch this piece of the estate, or, you know, you don't understand, you know, how deep the rabbit hole goes. I mean, like, you know, there's lots of real truth in there. Yeah,
there is, and I think it's again, it you know, it varies a lot, right? So, you know, we have clients who, you know, will openly admit to having, you know, 300 different applications running in their estate, and, you know, the interdependencies of those is known. But when you start to decommission or you start to replace, all of those edge cases that, you know, you really could never have identified start to become quite apparent. So, you know, it's not a small undertaking, but I think there's also a recognition that making a 300 application system, 310, 320, 350 as a way of facilitating what you're trying to do with your customers is just never going to work. It's just not sustainable. And I think, you know, the combination of pressure from regulators, change from regulators, the opportunity to use maturing technology is giving these guys really the opportunity to start to embrace some of the sort of the need to change, and is giving them some real impetus to do that, I think.
And where do you see the kind of, like, is it a technology theme that kind of kicks us off, or is it like the biz driven, or is it, you mentioned regulators there and that kind of stuff, which there's a huge amount going on. Certainly in the UK, right, with MPA and all that stuff. But what's the thing that lights that kind of match in terms of saying, is it biz driven, or where is it?
I mean, you guys must see this as well, right? I think that there's different drivers. You know, you can list out the types of drivers it might be, right? So sometimes it's about security, sometimes it's about cost, sometimes it's about scalability, sometimes it's about, you know, ability to react to change, sometimes it's, you know, we've got a regulator that's mandating us to do something and actually this is going to be a bit tough, so why don't we look a little bit broader in scope and kind of fix it for once and for good. I don't think we've got a single client, nor have we spoken to one, where their balance of those priorities are the same. It all depends on their business model, their legacy estate, their types of customers, where they are on the rest of their digital transformation, where they are with their core banking platform, whether they're building their own challenger banks if you're a large organisation. So I think the mix is very different. But I think those are kind of the sort of the key themes that we would see across them.
It's an interesting point you raised about the mix being different by the clients. I think what we see is that at some point in time, the pain has to be so big that they want to think about the risk of change and the cost of change, and actually also the pain of change that they go through. Yeah. I think we've been in many conversations, and some of them together, where the client said, I believe in the future that you're painting for me. I want that new technology stack. I'm just don't see the way out of my current swamp, the 350 applications. Yeah. And I think what you're now seeing as well, the growing recognition by regulators, but also by top management, is that continuing with stacking on top of this and trying to kind of just keep it imbalanced is not going to be the way forward. Yeah. And we see it with many clients where the demand is shifting over time for the technology stack, what it needs to deliver. Yeah. It needs to be faster, it needs to be more event-driven, it needs to be modern. You want to plug and play an ecosystem, and it's all impossible with the current setup. Yeah. And the real question is, how do you move to that direction? I think the recognition is there, this is the direction to go. How do you move, and how do you cut it up in time to move that way?
It's a very real realization that not doing something is in and of itself creating risk. Yeah. And so, I think when you look particularly at, the way that regulators are now really thinking about operational resilience, they're really thinking about adoption, they're thinking about, the role of public cloud, particularly in, not just in financial services, but in, critical key business services inside those financial institutions. I think it's not an easy thing to do, but I think in the last couple of years, it's almost become a necessity.
And just on that, I mean, do you think there's like a kind of like, are you in a kind of, dare I say, like a Goldilocks zone? In other words, like where the parts of the puzzle are kind of in the right place at the right, I mean, like what would those attributes be, or what are those characteristics that you, because like, I'll be honest with you, like, you guys have walked around for the last 5 years, payments, I would kind of go like, that's super hard, super complex. Yeah. Like I said, it's right in the middle of stuff. That's hard. But what do you think, like, are those aspects of that kind of, that you think are the pieces are in the right spot right now?
I think for us, the really big drivers have been this complete disconnect between pace of change pace of change driven by financial services businesses to their consumers, and they've just run out of road on legacy. And that was always going to happen at some point. Right. But the faster that runs, and the quicker consumer expectations change, and the more challengers choose to compete on technology, the faster it's accelerated that gap between very real digital transformation facing a consumer and the kind of the chasm that hits when you plug it into something, however old, however complicated, that's been there for a long time. And I think for us, we wrote cloud native 5 years ago. That was a business risk for us, right? So that had not been adopted in this industry for this type of sort of critical activity of literally moving billions of payments around a year, right? It hadn't been done, and so that was a commercial risk for us. But I think it happened at a time where the technology had matured to a point where, whilst it hadn't been proven, it was mature enough. And so what we got to do was to adopt a technology that was ready and then start to create the proof points. And that's really what we've been doing over the last 3-4 years. It's not a revolutionary technology stack. We're not trying to blockchain the universe. We're not trying to reinvent how a payment works. We're leveraging technology that's been proven in other sectors and in other markets that has real benefit for clients, and applying it into this kind of complex problem of, how do you run a bank and keep tens of millions of customers happy whilst performing open heart surgery on your payment flows, right? And that's the challenge we've set ourselves.